Mind Your Farm Business on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by RBC Royal Bank.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mind Your Farm Business podcast brought to you by RBC Royal Bank. I'm your host, Shaun Haney, host of Real Ag Radio and Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM, also the founder of RealAgriculture.com. Today, we're diving into a conversation that hits close to home for many farm families. How to protect and sustain wealth across future generations. You know, passing on the farm or the ranch is not just about transferring assets, it's about preparing the next generation to handle responsibility, independence, financial challenges, as well as wealth. Joining us today is Ted Oakley. He's managing partner of Oxbow Advisors and author of the book Second Generation Wealth. Ted brings decades of real-world experience helping families manage major liquidity events and avoid the common traps that threaten long-term family success. In this episode, we'll talk about why human behavior, not taxes or markets, is the biggest threat to family wealth, how to instill financial discipline and resilience in the next generation, and why tough conversations about money need to happen sooner rather than later. Let's get to it. Enjoy this episode of the Mind Your Farm Business Podcast. Ted, welcome to the Mind Your Farm Business Podcast.
Well, thanks, Shaun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I guess what prompted you to write the book Second Generation Wealth? What was the push?
You know, I've done this a long time, actually over 4 decades. And one of the things I notice about people that make a lot of money is they forget how to handle it a lot of times for themselves, but also with their children. And they wonder why money created a whole lot of problems and caused family problems, all sorts of things. And there's some basics to it, watching people over the years. And I've seen every single outcome that you could imagine for people that either sold a company, had a liquidity event. We've worked with really hundreds and hundreds of business owners that sold a company. So we have a pretty good idea of all the outcomes. A lot of mistakes are made, but a lot of people do it right too. And I just try to write about, these are the things that work, that we've seen that work. It's not just our idea. And these are the things we've seen that don't work.
Yeah, in the book you argue that the biggest threat to family wealth isn't taxes or markets. It's this issue of human behavior. Talk about that.
Well, the human behavior part of the problem about it is that all of a sudden, you know, most of the people that have a business ongoing, they work so long and hard in the business, and they probably have spent, unfortunately, and I'm not saying there's a price for success, but they spent less time around their children than maybe their spouse has or something like that. But when they do have this big liquidity event, things really change for everything. And what happens is, I think they forget, if for them it was really hard to make money. It's, you know, they had to go from nothing for most of them to really making a lot of money or having a lot of money. And they have this idea that I wouldn't want that to happen for my kids, which is exactly the reverse of what it should be. You should want your kids to have to struggle. And you should want your kids to have to make it on their own. That's what you should want, because that's what creates character. And you can't create any character if you don't have any obstacles, you know. And there's a great book by Ryan Holiday, a guy here in Austin, called Obstacle is the Way. And it's really about that. You have to have obstacles to really create a lot of character. And I think that's what they fail to realize.
Now, for a lot of people in agriculture, you know, land values have really accelerated the past, 20, 25 plus years. So there, we always talk in farming, you are what is it? Equity rich and cash poor. Some farms sell, and there's that liquidity event you're talking about. But even an operational farm can have a lot of wealth around it. A lot of people will say, you know what, you need to make sure your kids work off farm before they make that decision to come back. I'm assuming you're a big believer in that kind of scenario.
I am. I have to tell you though. Now, I'm unlike a lot of people in this business. I grew up really poor, so I worked my whole life on farms. I've run tractors, I've planted, I've cut hay, I've baled it, I've hauled it. I've put crops in, and so I know what that's like to have to crank that up every early in the morning and work it during the day. I know what that's like. I guess the one thing I would say about farming that's different from other businesses is this, and this is something I think is a plus for farming, by the way. More than likely, the children right now that are farming and doing well are doing basically, I know there's a change in seed and fertilizer and a lot of different things, and equipment, but generally they're doing the same thing their great granddaddy did. And so that's easier to pass down, for example, than it is if you own a manufacturing company out here and you sell it and you've got $100 million and that's all you have. You don't have anything else to give your kids. At least while those kids are on the farm growing up, they can work, okay, and then have them go out. And my idea is, look, go out and spend 5 or 6 or 7 years working for somebody else. It may be in farming. I'm not saying it's not, but I'm just saying they need to work for somebody else and not you as the owner, because you're the mom and dad, and go out and realize that when they do that, just because their last name ends in something, that doesn't make any difference when you're on the outside, because you're working for somebody, and you may be the biggest farmer in the county, and people look at you differently than they would if you're at another county and you're just working for somebody. Your name is just another name. That's the way you got to feel it when you go out there, and I think that's what they should have their kids do. My opinion now. Okay.
Yeah. You emphasize preparing the hares, not just preparing the money. But what does preparation of that next generation look like in actual practice?
Well, the practice of it is they should have to earn their own money from, I think you should start working kids, preferably if you can work them off the farm in another farm or somewhere else, even when they're 14, 15, 16 years old, have them working somewhere. There's always jobs they can do. They can work the feed store. There's a lot of things they can do. But if they can do it, okay, that's where they are, because they need to start earning money. And then when they leave, if they want to go to college, it's fine to pay for their college, give them a car. But after that, they need learning to handle money is paying the bills, paying the rent, paying your car, paying for whatever car problems you have, just everything on day-to-day life, and not getting money from your parents. If the parents solve every single problem that kid has, then they're setting them up for disaster, because they never learn to really, really handle money, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and in some cases, it's one thing when there's a little bit of money and trying to figure out how to handle that. That's one, that builds up some of those calluses you're talking about. It's when we're talking about a lot of money and exposed to it early and in abundance, and it's you can have kind of the wrong attitude about how to manage it, and just lack an understanding probably about how if not handled properly, it can just be gone.
Well, no question about it. And I think what you see a lot is when that money hasn't been handled right. If you get into like the third generation or fourth generation farms, and there's a lot of people living off this egg now, okay?
Yeah.
That's when you get into a problem, because you need those people out earning money on their own. They don't need to be trying to suck the farm dry. And I see that where you get to a point, you get so many heirs that are basically still related to the original, and everybody's getting a piece of the pie, and it doesn't work real well, because they need to be earning them. This should be an investment for them and not something they end up living off of. And then you end up with this situation. You've seen it, I know, where they end up having to sell some of the land.
Yep.
And pay everybody a piece so this third generation or fourth generation can make a living. And that's where it goes awry. That because those people should have gone out and made their own money and used the farm, their piece of the farm, as an investment. And it can pay dividends or whatever, but you can't have too many people living off of one golden egg, I should say.
Yeah. No, I know, Ted, you stress open communication in this process. That I get that. But money is one of those subjects where even in the richest of families, it can be kind of off limits, sort of taboo. Why do so many families avoid talking honestly about money, and what's the cost of that kind of taboo attitude?
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest reason I see is they don't feel like their children can handle money as well as they could, you know, and that's a bad feeling to push off on your kid, to say, you know what, you don't measure up to be as good as I am, all right? And that comes through in that process. The way you measure them up, though, and get them to that point is to put them out on their own, away from you, for 6, 7, 8, 9 years, whatever the term is. But if they learn to stand on their own 2 feet and they've got a lot of self-esteem, then you can feel like, I can start talking. And I always use some ages, but generally around mid-30s. Okay, it can be different for different kids, I understand, but it's about mid-30s before a kid really can understand the real benefit of money and how much money you have. You start giving them all that information in the late teens and the 20s, and all of a sudden you've ruined their ability to have ambition. And I think that's a lot of these financial planners out here will recommend it. Bring them in, tell them all about everything that you're worth. I totally disagree with that. I think you leave them out there, and to answer your question, when they're in the mid-30s or so, and you can talk to them, and I always recommend talking to your kids one-on-one, not as a group, because every kid's different, and you want them to feel comfortable to ask you questions. And you don't have to tell them everything, but you start with something. To say, this is what the farm's worth, this is what the ranch is worth. And we don't tell anybody, there's a reason when you go in somebody's farm or ranch, you don't ask how many acres they have. That's a taboo. Right. Well, it's the same thing in the family, right? You tell, they have to learn to really hold that tight. That's a family thing. And then you can get in, okay, this later on, get into money. You bring them on, because you have to remember now, they're going to have spouses along the way too, and you have to deal with that, because you want to talk to them, but you want to make them understand this is our family, okay, and I love your spouse, okay, but this money is our family, and you're going to have to protect it as such.
Are you a big pusher of, I know it could be another taboo subject, we might as well get into it, is like, are you a big pusher of prenuptials?
Well, as soon as you pull the prenup, you're gonna make the spouse feel, and I know this, you're gonna make the spouse feel like, okay, you don't trust me.
Yeah.
And I do think in one big, huge asset, like a big ranch or a big farm, that you should have a prenup. And if nothing else, you should align it this way to say, hey, look, we're going to have children, all right? I'm talking about the young ones. We're going to have children, and I want to make sure that if something were to happen between you and me, and I don't think it will, I love you to death, I don't think it'll happen, but if something did happen, I want to make sure that all these assets are also in place for our children. I don't want this asset split up, and that's the reason for the prenup. Now, that's a personal opinion. I've done, I'm divorced from a number of years ago, but what I did when I married a woman who had means as well, but what I did was I said, I'm going to put these assets over here that are assets jointly and you receive, et cetera, but these assets over here are going to go to my kids. And it's the same thing if you never have had a divorce. I think you have to say to that spouse, the reason I'm doing this prenup is on this situation right here, okay? We're going to make money together. We're going to make homes together, and all of that stuff is ours, all right? But this is a family situation that was passed down. I want to make sure my children can participate in that. And I think the spouse would understand that, and that it has really nothing necessarily to do with them, but it also protects the children in case the young owner twist off. It goes both ways is what I'm trying to say.
It does. Yeah. There's more than just the younger generation that times gets divorced. And,
So that's why I say that. And, it's when what you don't want to have happen, and I've seen it happen where they didn't manage this correctly. It's a big asset. Like, most farmers and ranchers, now if a rancher has oil and gas and minerals, that's one thing. Okay. Right. Or they have timber. If they have a cash flow crop of some kind, maybe hunting leases, that's one thing. Okay. But if they just have a ranch where they've got cattle and they're running cattle, this is not some huge cash flow operation, even though cattle prices are really high right now. But what happens is, the big asset is the land, and so you don't want a situation to where you get into the third generation and something happens with that couple or two of the marriages, and all of a sudden we had this great asset over the years, and now we've had to split it 4 ways. That's the reason for a prenup.
We'll get back to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast shortly, but first a word from our sponsor, RBC Royal Bank.
This episode of the Mind Your Farm Business podcast is brought to you by RBC. Your idea of passing down or picking up the reins happens here. Succession planning is about more than just handing over the keys. It's about creating a path forward for your farm, your family, and your future. Whether you're stepping aside or stepping up, RBC and their team of experts are here to help guide the transition. Visit rbc.com/agriculture to learn more.
I think some of the audiences probably, they get that, okay, you know what? Keeping the cash flow away from, the younger generation until they're like 35 to you build up some of that money callus, as I'll call it. That's one thing. But there's probably some of the audiences like, well, but that can go, what if it keeps getting extended and the trust never builds, and all of a sudden we're talking about the younger generation that's like 60 years old and they still feel like they're not getting any closer to practicality.
I know your question, and I think that's a mistake.
Yeah.
Because we deal with people that are 50, 60 years old. They're just waiting for the parents to die. I mean, what a sad way to run. The parents should have back where I'm talking about, 35 started. If they've got that much wealth, go ahead and give some of their kids. That's after they've learned the game, though. That's my whole point.
Yeah.
That period between 20 and 35 is real important for them to learn the machine. All right. Once they do that, then I think you give them some things, and you get them into their 40s. They've got some kids. You're trying to help them with some things. I think that's okay because they've already shown that they can make it on their own, and all you're doing is trying to enhance their life. And the other thing that happens like that, if when you put them on their own for a while, once you do things for them in the late 30s, 40s, what's happened, then they really appreciate it because they've been out there, they've run into the wall a few times by now. And so when you do something, they're like, I appreciate my mom and dad doing that for me and my spouse. And I think that's how you have to make that work. If you wait late and never talk to them about the will or anything like that, I think it's a big mistake. You're going to get older and your kids are going to resent you, and and then all of a sudden you have a situation where, somebody's getting more than on somebody else. It's all sorts of things. It's a mess. You can fix that though if you'll time it correctly. With also, again, they got to be out there, run into the wall a few times before they really appreciate it.
Well, and to that point, Ted, we both could probably name a number of football players that face no adversity through their junior years and into high school and into college, and they were 5-star from when they came out of the womb. And then they get to the NFL and it's sort of like, that's not such a great career because they had never ever dealt with adversity versus somebody, hey, look at the number 1 draft pick this year in the NFL, Cam Ward. He was a 0-star in high school, and now he's the number 1 pick overall. He probably has that adversity that he dealt with allows him to also deal with the success probably even better as well.
Well, and I think unfortunately on that subject, in the NIL with so much money when they're in college, if you look at yours, he's taking a pay cut to go to Miami, and Sanders probably too for that matter. But no, the other thing, I wrote a book a number of years ago entitled 30 Million and Broke. And I put a chapter in there on athletes because they, so many of them, I mean, 75% of them lose everything. And that's just another subject all to itself. But they don't learn to appreciate. Appreciating money is one thing. I tell people this: the only way that you're going to teach any kid, any child, to appreciate money is they have to experience the scarcity of it. If you don't do that, they're never going to appreciate it. And you're going to say, well, that's hard. I know. Well, I know it's hard, but you know what? That's what makes it work. It makes it work. I mean, I could have done a lot for my kids, but from the time they were 14 on, even though they were 13 and 14, I took cash money, paid friends of mine to work them all summer long, give them money on Friday, just like it's somebody else. Then they had a good real job at 16. They had to work in the summers during college. And when they got out, they had to go to work. Okay. Now, other kids were, traveling around Europe, laying out by the swimming pool, doing nothing. And you can't do that and get a result that you probably want. So
probably a lot of people here focus on the behavior. What do you do with the money and how do you handle it? But what I keep on getting from you is that we're focused on the attitude. If we work on the attitude about the money, that's going to provide a better outcome when it comes to the behaviors around it. Is that fair?
Yeah. Well, that's part of it. I mean, one of the things I tell people is that, okay, let's say you come into a tremendous amount of money, and obviously you and your spouse are going to change your lifestyle to a degree. You probably get a house in the mountains and maybe a house down in the Caribbean or something, but you do something differently, and maybe you expand, you spend some money, and your kids can see that. And I've had this question to me before, how do you get around? I said, well, here's what you have to do. First of all, if they ask questions about it, I use a line, and you should use this line. I tell them is that, look, your dad and I, or your mom and I are rich, okay? Because we worked as hard as we could to get to this point, but you're not, all right? And so we're not going to give this to you. If you want to go out and show us what you can do the next 10 years, and we'll talk about other things after that, the next 7 or 8 years, that's one thing. But that's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to show me that you can get, and I know, and by the way, say it lovingly, I know you can. You know what? I have full faith in that you can do it. And I want you to go out and make it on your own and make it go. And then, and you'll be surprised at how much benefit that'll be to you. So once you do that, I tell people you have to be an example. I mean, you can't get on a private plane that you bought and fly to Aspen and fly them with you. That doesn't work. You might say to them, look, you're going to be working all summer, but if that week that you take off, okay, we're going to fly you to Denver on Southwest, okay, and then you're going to catch a ride on a bus or whatever to get up to Aspen. That's how we're going to do this, all right? But Mom and Dad, you got a private plane. I could go with you. Yeah, you could, but you know what? We're already there, and that's our plane. That's not your plane. And you've got to draw the line on it. And I know people say, oh, that doesn't work. I know it works. I've seen people do it. I've got people, honestly, they're worth $1 billion that fly coach. I know it sounds crazy, but they do. Yeah. And one of the reasons they do is because they want their children not to feel entitled. And if they go out and make, and so, okay, you're going to go to Spain this summer. Next summer, we'll send you to France or Australia, whatever. No working, just hanging out, or out playing golf at the country club, something like that. Those things won't work. They don't work because they don't learn to be around people. They don't learn to do things for people. They don't learn to have empathy. they don't learn anything, and so I disagree with people that bring their kids along like that. They should draw that line and separate and say, you're not where we are, okay? And you're not going to be right now.
Well, it's similar to inside of a family business. Kid comes back from college and right away he's maybe not working on the factory floor or checking pigs in the feed yard. They're they're middle management or even upper management working in the office and things like that. It's a very similar sort of.
I've had a couple of kids come by to see me. In fact, I had one that I talked to just about a month ago, and he came by to see me about 2 years ago. And I said, where are you working in the summers? He said, well, and his dad has a wonderful business here. He's a good friend of mine. And I said, well, when you go out on that job, and it's a huge, great landscaping company. I said, but when you go out on that job and you go out with those crews, do not tell them what your last name is. Just tell them what your first name is. And he said, why is that? And I said, because you don't want them to know that you're related to your dad. You want to be like them, okay? And so these kids that come back like that, they never get. And by the way, I have seen it work. I'm not saying it doesn't work at all, but when it worked, it was where the dad or mom that owned the company they didn't put them up in the front office. They put them down on the lowest grunt level you could start on, and they kept them there. They had to get out there and work with, handling stuff with gloves and do all hard work, and then they could go to another section after 6 months, but they had to make it. And a lot of parents don't have the willpower to do that, but that's how if you bring them back in the company early, you better start them real low and start them on the grunt level stuff.
So, Ted, and I know we're going to wrap up here, but how do are there signs where, or there symptoms where I should realize, I'm not doing this right? I need to maybe reset this, as I'm trying to go through this process.
Yeah, the symptom is if you sit down and you realize that the percentage of your children's monthly cost of everything they're doing, that you're covering it, that you're covering, 60, 70% of it, then you're in the wrong game. And here's what happens a lot between the mother and dad. A lot of times one of them's softer than the other one. It can be one or the other. But the mother and dad got to be on the same page to start with. But they get on the same page, and it's hard to do. But you say, look, I tell you what, all I'm going to do is pay. I'm going to pay this much, and that's all I'll pay. I'll pay this much of the kids' schooling, and I'll pay this much of something, okay, whatever you want to choose. But that does not need to be, in my opinion, more than 10 or 15% of what they run every month. If it is, then all of a sudden you're getting that kid addicted to that cash coming in, and all of a sudden later on, let's say you get in trouble or something happens and they don't have as much cash, then you have trouble on your hands.
Yeah. Ted, I really appreciate this. This is like advice that has systemic impact for a lot of farm families across our Real Agriculture audience. So thank you so much for joining us here today. And honestly, best luck with the book, Second Generation Wealth. Encourage everybody to go out there and get it. And thank you so much, Ted. Appreciate it.
You bet, Shaun. Good to see you.
Oh, that wraps another valuable episode of the Mind Your Farm Business podcast. A big thank you to Ted Oakley of Oxbow Advisors for joining us today and sharing his insights from Second Generation Wealth. Man, pick up that book. Pick up that book. Ted's message was clear. If you want to protect your family's legacy, you must prepare the next generation. Not just the inheritance. You got to... From teaching the value of hard work to encouraging independence and having open, honest conversations about wealth, it's about building the right attitudes early to prevent costly mistakes later. As Ted emphasized, the only way to truly appreciate money is to experience the scarcity of it. In agriculture, we all, no matter how successful or, just the struggles your farm has gone through, we've all experienced that scarcity when it comes to money. And if you wait too long to involve the next generation, how it can create resentment and missed opportunities. For more episodes of Mind Your Farm Business podcast, head over to mindyourfarmbusiness.com. And a big thank you to RBC Royal Bank for supporting this great podcast series. If you have any questions, make sure you send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or you can also call the Real Ag feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thank you for tuning in to this episode. And everybody, come on, keep on minding your farm business.